Leona Briers clutched her worn denim jacket tighter, a shield in the bustling hallways of Oakhaven Academy. Her auburn hair, usually pulled back, framed a face etched with quiet worry, and her slender build seemed to shrink among the throng of students heading to their classes. Barely 5'4", with a soft voice that often went unheard, Leona had become a master of invisibility in her new school of 4 months. She gripped the faded straps of her canvas satchel, keeping her eyes trained on the scuffed floor, hoping to survive another day unnoticed. Moving to Oregon from her sleepy town in Montana was hard enough without the constant reminder that she stood out. Her mother's sudden promotion had turned her life upside down, and starting anew in the middle of the autumn term felt like navigating a maze in the dark. The chime sounded for third period, and Leona rushed towards her assigned locker. As she struggled with the stubborn lock, she heard the distinct click of expensive boots against the linoleum. Her heart sank. Well, look what the mountain breeze dragged in. Coraline Blackwood's voice dripped with a condescending tone honed by years of wealth and unchecked power. The brunette, almost 6 inches taller than Leona, possessed an athletic physique and flawlessly styled hair that marked her as the undisputed queen bee of Oakhaven Academy. Leona's fingers trembled slightly as she tried to retrieve her art supplies. She knew from experience that engaging with Coraline only made matters worse. The girl thrived on attention, and Leona refused to give her the satisfaction. "I'm talking to you, country bumpkin." Coraline moved closer, flanked by her loyal followers, Juniper Fields and Mallory Lake. Juniper mirrored Coraline, with slightly lighter hair and an equally nasty sneer. Mallory remained mostly silent, but followed Coraline's every command, her presence adding an air of menace to the group. Leona finally managed to grab her sketchpad and closed her locker with a quiet click. She turned to leave, but Coraline's perfectly manicured hand shot out to block her way. "Did your family arrive in a beat-up pickup truck, wearing that raggedy jacket you always have on?" Coraline's voice boomed, drawing attention from nearby students who slowed down to watch the drama unfold. Heat crept up Leona's neck, but she kept her voice calm. "Excuse me, I need to get to art class." "Oh, she speaks like us after all," Juniper giggled, earning nods of approval from the growing crowd. "I thought she only knew how to say, 'Howdy, partner.'" Leona's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. What they didn't know, what nobody at Oakhaven Academy knew, was that her mother wasn't just any newly promoted executive. Evelyn Briers was a former FBI special agent who had spent years teaching self-defense tactics before becoming a corporate security consultant. And every evening since Leona turned 13, she had passed those skills on to her daughter in their small backyard training space. But Leona had made a promise to herself when they moved to Oregon that she would try to fit in, to be normal. Fighting back would only confirm their assumptions about her being different, dangerous, not one of them. So she swallowed her pride and tried to step around Coraline's outstretched arm. "Where do you think you're going?" Coraline grabbed the collar of Leona's denim jacket. "We're not done talking to you." "Please, let me pass." Leona's voice was barely audible, but there was something in her tone that made Coraline's grip loosen for a split second. The moment vanished quickly. Coraline's cruel grin returned, and she released Leona with a dismissive shove. "Run along to art class, little mouse. Try not to embarrass yourself too much." As Leona hurried away, she could hear their taunting laughter echoing down the hallway. Several students had filmed the encounter on their phones, no doubt already posting it online with cruel comments. The familiar sting of humiliation settled in her chest, but she pushed it down and focused on getting through the day. Pottery at Oakhaven Academy took place in a spacious art studio that could easily accommodate 2 full classes. Mr. Abernathy, a retired sculptor with a kind face and a relaxed demeanor, ran his classes with a gentle hand. Unfortunately, his attention to artistic expression didn't extend to monitoring social dynamics among his students. Leona changed quickly in the restroom, hoping to avoid another confrontation. Her pottery attire consisted of simple black leggings and a plain white t-shirt that had seen better days. As she emerged from the restroom, she spotted Griffin Hayes working at a pottery wheel. Griffin was one of the few students who had shown her any kindness since her arrival at Oakhaven Academy. He was the captain of the cross-country team, with dark curly hair and a friendly smile that made him genuinely liked rather than feared like Coraline's group. During their shared world history class, he had offered to be her partner for a research project when no one else would volunteer. Their friendship was still new and fragile, but it represented a small ray of light in an otherwise bleak environment. "Hey, Leona," Griffin grinned. "Ready to get your hands dirty?" She managed a small smile in return. "As ready as I'll ever be." Mr. Abernathy clapped his hands, and the class gathered in the center of the studio. Today's project was creating ceramic vases, which meant working individually at the pottery wheels and shaping clay into desired forms. Leona found herself near Griffin, which provided some comfort until she realized that Coraline, Juniper, and Mallory were all nearby. The class began with typical high school energy. Students experimented with the spinning wheels, attempting to mold the clay while avoiding making a mess. Leona tried to stay focused on her own work, avoiding direct confrontation while still participating enough to avoid Mr. Abernathy's attention. Everything changed when Griffin attempted to help a classmate with her clay. Coraline intercepted him, and what should have been a simple interaction turned into something more aggressive. She grabbed his arm and yanked hard enough to make him lose his balance, then followed up with a sharp kick to his shin that the teacher couldn't see from his position. "Watch where you're going, athlete boy," Coraline sneered. Griffin straightened up, his easygoing demeanor shifting slightly. "That was uncalled for, Coraline. Prove it." She stepped closer, using her height advantage to intimidate him. Leona felt something cold settle in her stomach as she watched the confrontation unfold. She had managed to stay under the radar for months, but seeing Griffin being targeted because of his association with her triggered something protective and dangerous in her chest. The class continued, but the dynamic had shifted. Coraline's group began acting more aggressively, particularly targeting Griffin whenever possible. During one demonstration, Juniper deliberately splashed muddy water on him as he walked past, sending it splattering across his face. When he wiped it off, Mr. Abernathy was conveniently looking the other way. "Oops," Juniper said with mock innocence, "so clumsy." Leona's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every instinct her mother had trained into her screamed for action, but she forced herself to remain still. Getting involved would only make things worse for both her and Griffin. The breaking point came during the final minutes of class. Leona had been attempting to stay near her wheel when her classmate's vase collapsed. In a moment of uncharacteristic boldness, she saw an opportunity to help and grabbed some fresh clay. Her quick thinking surprised everyone, including herself, and she managed to save the vase before it was completely ruined. She was halfway back to her wheel when Coraline appeared in her path like a wall of brunette fury. "Not so fast, country bumpkin." Leona tried to sidestep around her, but Coraline was ready. Instead of attempting a fair interaction, she grabbed the front of Leona's denim jacket, the same one she wore every day like armor, and yanked with all her strength. The sound of tearing fabric echoed across the art studio like a gunshot. Leona's jacket, already worn thin from years of wear, split completely down the front. Snaps scattered across the floor like pebbles, and the tear extended from the collar all the way to the hem. But it wasn't just the destruction of her clothing that shattered something inside Leona. It was the jacket itself, a gift from her grandmother before she passed away, one of the few tangible connections Leona had to her family's history and the life she had left behind in Montana. The art studio fell silent, except for the hum of the pottery wheels, which had slowed down as everyone watched. Leona stood frozen in the center of the room, her ruined jacket hanging in tatters around her shoulders, the lump of clay still clutched in her trembling hand. Coraline's triumphant laughter cut through the silence like a knife. "Oops, guess you'll have to ask your mommy to buy you a new one." That's when something fundamental shifted inside Leona Briers. The quiet, invisible girl who had spent months swallowing her pride and accepting humiliation suddenly remembered exactly who she was underneath all that careful camouflage. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory from countless training sessions. "Control your emotions, sweetie. Channel them. Never fight in anger, but never be afraid to protect what matters." Leona slowly set the clay down on the studio floor. When she straightened up, something in her posture had changed completely. Her shoulders squared, her spine straightened, and her green eyes held a cold fire that made several nearby students take an unconscious step backward. "You want to do this here?" Leona's voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent art studio with perfect clarity. Coraline's laughter faltered slightly. She had expected tears, embarrassment, maybe an attempt to run away. She hadn't expected this calm, controlled response that seemed to carry an undercurrent of genuine danger. "Do what?" Coraline tried to maintain her commanding presence, but something about Leona's transformation was unsettling. "Cry to the teacher? Run back to Montana?" "No!" Leona began walking toward her, each step measured and deliberate. "I want to finish what you started." The circle of students widened instinctively. Even Mr. Abernathy seemed to sense that something had fundamentally changed in the dynamic, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. Coraline was still taller, still stronger looking, still surrounded by her loyal followers, but for the first time since Leona had arrived at Oakhaven Academy, she was the one who seemed uncertain. "You want to fight me?" Coraline's voice carried a note of disbelief. "You?" "I want you to apologize." Leona stopped just outside of arm's reach, her stance perfectly balanced. "To me, and to Griffin, and to every other student you've bullied in this school." Juniper snorted with laughter. "Are you insane?" "Coraline doesn't apologize to anyone, especially not some nobody transfer student." "Then we have a problem." Leona's voice remained perfectly calm. Coraline's face flushed with anger. In her world, respect came through intimidation, and allowing someone like Leona to challenge her authority would destroy everything she had built. She stepped forward aggressively, intending to shove Leona backward and reassert her dominance. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but seemed to stretch across eternity for everyone watching. As Coraline's hands moved toward her shoulders, Leona shifted her weight slightly and caught Coraline's left wrist with her right hand. The movement was so smooth and natural that it looked almost choreographed. Before Coraline could react, Leona had stepped to the side and used Coraline's own momentum to send her stumbling forward. Coraline caught herself before falling, but her confident expression had been replaced by surprise and confusion. "What the heck was that?" "That was me being nice." Leona's stance hadn't changed, but everyone could see that she was ready for whatever came next. "Walk away, Coraline. This doesn't have to get ugly." Instead of backing down, Coraline's humiliation fueled her anger. She came forward again, this time throwing a wild punch aimed at Leona's face. Leona moved like a willow tree in the wind, tilting her head just enough to let the punch sail past her cheek. At the same time, she stepped forward and delivered a swift kick to Coraline's thigh with pinpoint accuracy. It wasn't a devastating blow, but it was enough to buckle Coraline's knee and leave her unbalanced. Gasps rippled around the art studio. Several students had their phones out, recording what was quickly becoming the most dramatic confrontation in Oakhaven Academy's recent history. Juniper and Mallory moved to flank Leona, apparently thinking they could overwhelm her with numbers. They discovered quickly that this was a miscalculation. As Juniper approached from the right, Leona used a simple arm lock that sent the girl sprawling across the polished floor. Mallory hesitated for a moment, which was all the opening Leona needed to close the distance and apply a leg sweep that brought Mallory to her knees within seconds. The entire sequence had taken less than 30 seconds. Coraline was still trying to regain her balance. Juniper was sitting on the floor looking dazed, and Mallory was tapping frantically against Leona's grip. Leona released Mallory and stepped back, giving all three girls space to recover. She wasn't interested in causing serious harm. She just wanted to make a point. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Leona said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent art studio. "But I'm done being your target. I'm done watching you hurt people who can't defend themselves, and I'm definitely done letting you disrespect my family and my memories." Coraline struggled to her feet, her face red with exertion and humiliation. For a moment, it looked like she might try to continue the fight. But as she looked around the art studio and saw the expressions on her classmates' faces, surprise, respect, and in some cases fear, she seemed to realize that the social dynamics had shifted irrevocably. "This isn't over," Coraline said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Yes, it is." Leona picked up the torn pieces of her denim jacket from the floor. "Unless you want to keep testing whether I learned anything else from my mother." Mr. Abernathy finally found his voice and clapped his hands. "All right, everyone back to your wheels. Class isn't over yet." As the students began to disperse, many of them shot curious and respectful glances toward Leona. The invisible girl, who had spent months being the target of cruel jokes, had just dismantled the school's most feared bullies without breaking a sweat. Griffin approached her cautiously, his expression a mixture of amazement and concern. "Leona, that was... Where did you learn to do that?" She managed a small smile as she gathered the remains of her grandmother's jacket. "My mom taught me a few things. I just never had a reason to use them before." "Are you okay? I mean, about your jacket?" Leona looked down at the torn fabric in her hands. It hurt to lose something so precious, but she realized that Coraline had inadvertently given her something more valuable: the courage to stop hiding who she really was. "I will be," she said. The next few days at Oakhaven Academy were unlike anything Leona had experienced since her arrival. Word of the art studio confrontation had spread through the school like wildfire, enhanced by cell phone videos that captured every moment of her methodical dismantling of Coraline's group. The reaction was mixed but largely positive. Students who had previously ignored her now nodded respectfully in the hallways. Some even approached her directly to express their admiration or to share their own stories of being bullied by Coraline's group. Coraline herself had become notably subdued. She still maintained her social circle, but the aggressive confidence that had made her so intimidating had been replaced by a more cautious approach to dealing with other students. She avoided Leona entirely, though Leona occasionally caught her staring with an expression that seemed equal parts resentment and grudging respect. The transformation wasn't without its complications. Some students seemed to expect Leona to become some kind of vigilante, approaching her with requests to deal with their own bullying problems. She gently declined these requests, explaining that she wasn't interested in becoming the school's enforcer. "I just wanted to be left alone," she explained to Griffin during lunch on Tuesday. "I never wanted to hurt anyone." They were sitting at a table near the windows, and Leona was wearing a new jacket her mother had bought to replace the destroyed denim one. It was nice, but it lacked the emotional weight of her grandmother's gift. "You know what I think?" Griffin said, unwrapping his sandwich. "I think you showed everyone that you don't have to accept being treated badly. That takes guts." Leona considered this as she picked at her salad. "My mom always said that fighting should be the last resort, but that doesn't mean you should never fight at all. I guess I just reached my last resort." Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Coraline Blackwood approached their table with obvious reluctance, her usual entourage nowhere to be seen. "Can I talk to you?" she asked Leona, her voice lacking its typical arrogance. Griffin started to object, but Leona held up a hand. "It's okay." "What do you want, Coraline?" Coraline shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. I came to say..." She paused and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. About your jacket and about the other stuff." The apology was clearly difficult for her, but it seemed genuine. Leona studied her face for a moment before responding. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because you were right. About me being a bully, about hurting people who couldn't defend themselves." Coraline's cheeks reddened with embarrassment. "My parents got called in for a meeting with the principal yesterday. Apparently some of the videos from the studio got sent to the school board. They're talking about suspension if I don't change my behavior." Leona nodded slowly. And because what you did in the studio wasn't just about fighting. You had me completely defeated, but you didn't try to make me feel small. You could have really hurt me, but you didn't. You made your point and then you stopped." Coraline looked directly at Leona for the first time. "I don't think I would have shown the same self-control." The admission hung in the air between them. Griffin watched the exchange with fascination, clearly witnessing a side of Coraline that few people had ever seen. "I accept your apology," Leona said finally. "But this can't happen again. Not to me, not to Griffin, not to anyone else." "It won't," Coraline said quickly. "I promise." As Coraline walked away, Griffin shook his head in amazement. "I never thought I'd see the day when Coraline Blackwood apologized to anyone." "People can change," Leona said, though she kept her voice carefully neutral. "We'll see if she means it." The rest of the autumn term passed without major incident. Coraline kept her word about ending her bullying behavior, though she and Leona never became friends. They maintained a respectful distance, acknowledging each other with nods when they passed in the hallways. More importantly, the overall atmosphere at Oakhaven Academy seemed to shift. Other students began standing up for themselves and their friends more readily, perhaps inspired by Leona's example. The bystander culture that had allowed bullying to flourish began to erode as more people realized they had the power to intervene. Leona's friendship with Griffin deepened throughout the winter months. What had started as a simple partnership in history class evolved into something more meaningful as they discovered shared interests in painting, old movies, and bad jokes. By December, it was clear to everyone that their relationship had moved beyond friendship, though they were both too shy to make it official. On the last day before winter break, Leona found herself standing in the same hallway where Coraline had first confronted her months earlier. She was wearing a new jacket, one that she had learned to sew herself with help from online tutorials and her mother's patient guidance. It wasn't identical to her grandmother's gift, but it carried its own significance as a symbol of her ability to rebuild and move forward. Griffin appeared beside her, carrying his backpack and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had just finished his last test. "Ready for winter break?" he asked. "More than ready," Leona replied. "Though I have to admit, this place grew on me. Even after everything that happened," Leona considered the question carefully. The bullying had been genuinely upsetting, and losing her grandmother's jacket still hurt when she thought about it. But the experience had also taught her valuable lessons about standing up for herself and others. "Especially because of everything that happened," she said finally. "I learned that I don't have to choose between being kind and being strong. I can be both." As they walked toward the exit together, Leona reflected on the transformation she had undergone during her first year at Oakhaven Academy. She had arrived as a quiet, invisible girl, trying desperately to fit in and avoid confrontation. She was leaving as someone who had found her voice and learned to use her strength in service of justice rather than revenge. The girl who had once hidden behind worn jackets and downcast eyes now walked with confidence, secure in the knowledge that she could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be a victim, and that standing up for yourself doesn't require you to become the very thing you're fighting against. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother. "How did your last day go, sweetie?" Leona smiled as she typed her response. "I think you'd be proud of how I handled myself this term, Mom." "Ready to show me some new techniques over the break?" Her reply came quickly. "Always. But remember, the best fights are the ones you avoid." As she and Griffin stepped out into the crisp Oregon air, Leona carried with her the hard-won wisdom that strength without kindness is just force, but kindness without strength often lets harm win. Finding the right balance between the two had been her greatest lesson at Oakhaven Academy, and one that would serve her well in whatever challenges awaited her in the future. 23,733 characters.